As a global community, we've again been bombarded with images and news articles, reports, reporting atrocities globally. We expend time analyzing the analyses, taking sides, arguing our positions, even though we know intuitively that none of this solves problems. But how can problems be solved? They're so immense. On August 24th, nearly 500,000 Palestinian children in Gaza who were scheduled to start a new school year were unable to do so because of Israel's latest military assault on the occupied and besieged coastal strip, according to the Institute for Middle East Understanding. The same source reports further, the UN estimates that 373,000 children require direct and specialized psychosocial support, while all of Gaza's approximate 900,000 children have been affected by war and need some level of psychosocial support. Al Jazeera reports that 2,360 children have been killed in Gaza in less than 3 weeks, with a further 5,364 children having been injured. Take a look at that picture. Let the image into your soul. These are children. Utter sadness, fear, trauma. Rossi shared about how difficult it was to lose a grandfather, and it is. It absolutely is. When we see too many images, too much video footage, hear too many reports, we become desensitized. Last week, Derek led us in a reflection on trauma and our response to it. He carefully noted Jesus' tears at Lazarus' tomb. Jesus wept. He modeled the importance of allowing emotions for us. He knows what it feels like to be children such as this. Let's not think for a moment that the children under the Roman occupation, which was the condition when Jesus was on earth, were carefree and happy and had sunshiny and washed faces all the time. No, these children were traumatized too. These children were the ones that Jesus accepted and valued and held up for us as examples of people of the kingdom that we should be like. In the text for this morning, we're invited to observe Jesus when he experiences another painful loss, the loss of his cousin and predecessor in ministry, the prophet John, who introduced Jesus to the masses. The empire, through a devious and manipulative turn of events, had executed this dynamic spokesperson. So again, Jesus mourns. He was not immune. He was not sheltered from, and he did not distance himself from the recurring pain of death, injustice, and loss of loved ones. If anyone understands the trauma of the civilians in Palestine, Israel, and Ukraine, Jesus does. We sometimes wonder how on earth Jesus was able to continually meet the needs of thousands of people, respond with care and compassion without showing signs of bitterness or resentment. We know how exhausting that work can be. In the very first verse that Susan read are the words, "He withdrew in a boat to a deserted place by himself." He withdrew in a boat to a deserted place by himself. How counterintuitive this is for our culture. Withdrawing is not our strongest suit. We tend to text, get on social media, make phone calls, meet up with friends, and a host of other active pursuits when confronted with pain. We want to numb it, deactivate it, if that were possible. Jesus withdrew. He withdrew in a boat, a transportation method that could easily be a single-person vehicle. It was not a vehicle that could be used for racing or to be prone to rage driving. It was not a motorboat. It was not a luxury liner. It was not a cruise ship. It was a vehicle that took him where he wanted to go, which was to a deserted place. Unplugged, unreachable, untrackable. But even more importantly, he withdrew into nature, into the stillness, where he could see the darkening sky and watch as the stars came out over the placid lake. He feels the breeze in his face, and he allows his blood pressure to stabilize. His breath slows, and he could weep unobserved, uninhibited, uninterrupted. He was by himself, alone with his grief, alone with his thoughts, alone in nature, and alone with his God. We have no idea how long of a time he spent by himself. There was a space of time between him leaving in a boat and then returning to the shore. The text focuses on the people who were trying to reach him, but I am inviting you to look at where Jesus is, withdrawn in a boat, in a deserted place, in nature by himself. This is a critical piece of the grief, loss, trauma cycle. If there is no space between one event and the next, one news report and the next, the trauma piles up. There is no place between, like there was in Jesus' life. We have a dilemma. We can either carry on in the midst of trauma and just hope for the best, or we can recognize that space between is an invitation. First of all, it's an invitation to look at the kinds of remedies that we seek when we've seen too many breaking news images or been confronted with too many news cycles, when we have a difficult time turning off the TV or giving up scrolling or giving our opinion on every local or national or global development. How do we decompress? How do we de-stress from the pain and agony of the world? I decided to do a quick internet search, and here are some of the recurring suggestions for just that. Number 1, set firm time limits. Number 2, try not to consume news before bedtime. Number 3, make an effort to find good news. Number 4, set boundaries. And number 5, change your social media feeds. There's nothing wrong with any of these suggestions, but something is missing. When trauma piles up, when the pain becomes too deep, our human response is usually to reach for something to numb that pain. Medication, distraction, entertainment, sometimes even self-harm. Pressing down that pain so we don't have to feel it. Could it be that what we thought would protect us actually wears us down? Jesus gives us critical insight into one irreplaceable step in healing. Without it, we become personally overwhelmed and therefore ineffective in our call as concerned citizens, engaged parents and professionals, and valuable companions to our friends and loved ones. We need that space between, which Jesus modeled. And let me just add, there are times when helpers and ministers and therapists and parents and teachers cannot take the disciples with them. Not everything is a group project. This becomes evident when we reconnect with the disciples at the time when Jesus again lands on the shore. Jesus arrives filled with compassion. The disciples are quick to dismiss those around them for whom they have no remedy, no answers. Jesus saw the people as humans in need of the very basics of life. The disciples assessed their current isolated condition, their location, and urged Jesus to do something that seems completely logical. Send them away so that they can get some food. I admit I'd do the same thing. I'd have had a look at how low that sun was getting in the darkening sky and calculate how long it might take for this crowd of people to find some food, but then realize we're way beyond that point in the day. That boat has passed. And then anxiety would set in. Now what? When there seems to be no solution, imagining myself as one of the disciples, I realize, wait a minute, I have no tools for this. And besides, I don't really know why we always have to have these thousands of people around us anyway. Can we just go back to being our small group of close followers? This is getting far too complicated. So a situation can very quickly escalate from being confusing to becoming overwhelming to kindling a deep bitterness within ourselves. And when we arrive at that point, we have no desire to be compassionate. Our self-protective response is, get me out of here and get me out of here quick. Or get them out of here quick. But Jesus challenges them. You give them something to eat. Oh, come on now, seriously? We don't have anything. Here's another huge dilemma. Our mandate is, you help them, and our response is, we have nothing. The two seem to be poles apart. Jesus models something for them that is entirely different from what they've always considered to be the only way. The only way is, in fact, not the only way. Jesus looks up. He blesses what's in front of him, and then he watches what happens. What would happen if we would regularly take time to withdraw by ourselves into nature, look up to alternative possibilities? We might even come to realize that it's because we have withdrawn, gotten into nature, allowed this breeze to cool down our faces and slow down our heart rate, clear our minds, calm our anxiety, that we are suddenly able to see something we've never seen before. Could it be that this space between, this solitary place in nature with God, both heals us and fuels us with compassion? The Latin word for compassion is compati, and it means to suffer with. Compassion means someone else's heartbreak is our heartbreak. When we begin to see people, all people, as humans in need of healing, we are inching toward compassion. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, "We must learn to regard people less in the light of what they do or omit to do, and more in the light of what they suffer." Let me repeat that. We must learn to regard people less in the light of what they do or omit to do, and more in the light of what they suffer. This is another example of looking up, blessing what's in front of you, and watching what happens. There is a path beyond ourselves, beyond our know-how, even beyond our experience. When we realize this, we open ourselves to curiosity. What does it feel like to be you? What does it feel like to be a 3 or 5 or 7-year-old child sitting in an emergency room without your parents? Your parents may have been killed in an air raid, or you may have gotten separated from them in the throng of people all running for their lives. What does this feel like? What does it feel like to be a parent to one of these children? They possibly have no idea where their children are, or if they're still alive, or where they will ever find them. At this point in our history, we have peace. Not complete peace, however, when we think of the horrors that occurred in Maine this past week. We can swing from allowing these kinds of images to move us to completely shutting down. There can be a third way, the way of compassion, the way that does not deny curiosity, nor become overwhelmed with suffering, nor numb the pain. The way of compassion takes one step at a time. Living as a compassionate person allows you to see what's in front of you right now, to look up and bless that is in front of you, even if it seems far too small. And then wait, observe what happens. Compassion may move you to become involved with children in our community. It may invite you to donate to reputable causes that are offering assistance in these troubled global regions. It may remind you to pray, believing that compassion defines the divine, because this is how we experience Jesus. Yesterday, a group from our congregation assisted the staff at Poverello House to serve the noon meal. This is one way in which compassion becomes practical. It is one way in which we guard against helplessness, disillusionment, bitterness. I don't think Kathy's here this morning, but thank you to Kathy and everyone that joined her for offering this vital, vital ministry, exactly what these members of our community need. Regular food and a caring presence. Being a person doesn't require us to feed 5,000 people. It does invite us to see every one of our neighbors as worthy of respect and care and love, worthy of dignity. Our very human response to suffering, both near and far, is to protect ourselves from even more pain. When we do that, however, we're not protected as much as that it sets us up to become cynical, to blame others, and to shut down our own emotions. And that only drives us deeper into suffering. What's Jesus' response after he spends time healing those in pain and providing for their physical needs? In the very next verse, one which we did not read, we're told, and I quote, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead to the other side of the lake while he dismissed the crowds. When he sent them away, he went up onto a mountain by himself to pray. Evening came, and he was alone. Back into nature, back into solitude, back to his spiritual work. This is the cycle that we are shown. Solitude, nature, and feeding our soul, back to engaging with people in need, then back again to repeat the process. I cannot stress this enough. The space between, the powerful cycle to combat cynicism, anxiety, and the sense of being overwhelmed. It's a revolutionary change of lifestyle in our hectic, technology-driven, constantly engaged culture. The final verse that Susan read encourages us to consider the Christ as our model. And then we are urged to unity. This may seem impossible to us given the divisiveness of our environment. We will come to know unity on any issue simply by being fully informed, taking every opportunity to articulate our opinions to anyone and everyone. Unity will come from practicing this model: engagement, retreat, re-engagement. There is no substitute. Anything less will only serve to increase our cynicism and bitterness and pit one against the other. This is actually a very good reminder just before the holiday season starts with its excessive and unrelenting demands. Also before we head into another year, which will most certainly give us more reasons for anxiety and grief. We can prepare. We can intentionally put empowering practices in place. I invite you to embrace the space between. May we find the grace to do so.